Part 17, Chapter 15 of the Dragon's Scourge. Under Heaven. The climb up the steep canyon walls was slow and treacherous until the Clove reached the remnants of the bridge hanging off the ledge. It swayed in the cool, gentle night's breeze. Using one of the ropes, the Clove scaled the stone wall until he reached the top, and his fingers sank into the earth, wet with dew. The Clove crouched low and silently moved through the undergrowth, following the sound of the running water until he came to the river. It didn't take him long to retrace his tracks. The smell of rotting horse flesh and the sound of flies swarming about the dead carcass was impossible to miss. He let out an uneasy breath as he carefully stepped into the black river, which shimmered under the starlight. Suddenly, a wolf cried out, and others answered in unison across the river. The Clove's blood went cold as he spotted a dozen pairs of glistening eyes shining out from the riverbank. He froze in panic, as he didn't have a single blade on him. His boots were soaked, and his wet pant legs clung to him, making it impossible to run. The Clove's yellow eyes blazed heatedly back at the silent, glittering eyes in the darkness, waiting for them to come at him. He shifted uneasily. Two dark silhouettes began crossing the river on his left flank, but to his surprise, they stopped and watched him intently. The Clove remembered the bloated horse carcass behind him and slowly stepped out of the water, holding his breath as one by one they crossed the river in single file, eyeing him warily as they passed. Moments later, he could hear the sounds of snapping teeth tearing through flesh. He hastily moved down the river until he spotted the flash of steel along the bank. It seemed too good to be true, but his heart leapt for joy as he came close and found his father's sword resting quietly at the water's edge. He knelt down and lifted up from the damp earth, pressing the cold blade to his forehead and heaving a sigh of relief. Just then he felt a cool breeze. In the reflection of the blade he saw a woman standing in snow-white robe. Her long red hair was not affected by the wind. Somehow he recognized the woman as the younger form of Nobetha, which he had seen before the great battle with the Enthrallin. His face grew pale, and his hands trembled as he gripped the sword. But she didn't speak, and he didn't have the courage to turn and face her. She turned away and vanished without a word. The Clove gasped and dropped his sword in terror. He whirled around to look for her, but she was nowhere to be found. His heart hammered and his breath was heavy. Sweat poured down his face as his eyes searched the trees for the apparition. Intoxicated with panic and fear, the Clove's hands trembled as he picked up his cutlass, and then he became still as the wind changed direction, carrying the inviting scent of venison roasting over a campfire. The Clove regained his senses, and his yellow eyes flickered with hunger and curiosity. He grinned and moved silently through the trees until he spotted the dark silhouettes of men in armor, hovering about a large cooking fire, drinking mead and carrying on noisily.
"Ugh, how did we get stuck building damned nets all stinking day?" one of the men complained. "I'm a warrior. I ain't no stinking fisherman." You wouldn't say that if the shaman was around.
Another young soldier piped up.
Yeah, why are we building these nets? Everyone else has gone to block off the sides of the canyon. If we stay here, we're going to miss everything,
he griped. Flint, the largest and senior of the lot, had enough and gave a swift kick to the young man's chest, sending him sprawling backwards.
We have lost 6 seasoned men that were 10 times the warrior you will ever be, you sniveling whelp. No, if anybody should be complaining, it ought to be me, because I have to watch over the young sniveling new shits like you.
The young warrior stared up at him fearfully.
I didn't mean nothing, no ill will towards your brothers, Flint, I swear it, he said quickly.
Flint scowled and threw his horn of mead down at the young man. Get out of my sight, he snarled. Go gather more wood for the fire before I throw you in it, you stupid boy. The clove watched silently as the young warrior scurried away from the group of bearded men. Flint then snapped impatiently at the others. Fools! We had trouble enough fighting the dragon as a human. If she changes back to her true form, we'll lose many more lives before we can bring the dragon down.
True. But why didn't the dragon shift into its true form on the bridge? That's what I want to know,
inquired one of the men sitting across the campfire. Flint stroked his beard thoughtfully.
Either it could not change at the time, or it felt as a human she could save its wings from our arrows. Maybe it was smart enough even to know that we would not kill it until it changed. A dead human body isn't much of a trophy, he explained.
The shaman told us that there would only be one, but there was 2, interjected another.
Flint grimaced. True, the man with the yellow eyes showed more inhuman qualities than the other. The chief and I suspect he is also a dragon. The clove grinned when he heard this, but then he turned at the rustling tree branches behind him and came face to face with the young warrior gathering firewood. The youngster dropped the handfuls of sticks and gasped in surprise, and then the wolves began to howl, causing him to turn in fright. The very moment he turned his shoulder, the clove jumped onto his back and began choking him, blocking his airway so that he could not cry out for help. In a matter of seconds, the young warrior's body went limp, and he fell to the ground, unconscious. Using the cover of darkness, the clove hastily stripped the young warrior of his leather armor, taking his dagger and battle-axe. To complete the disguise, the clove did his best to rub the war paint off and smear it on his own face, and then picked up the bundle of sticks and walked toward the campfire, keeping his head down and his eyes on the ground. The clove's mouth watered as he drew close to the deer rotating over the yellow flames. He silently set the sticks near the campfire, pulled out his dagger, and cut away a thin strip from the shoulder, grunting in approval as he put the moist venison into his mouth and quietly listened to the conversation.
Nothing better than venison to replace a warrior's strength, the fat, bearded man, turning the spit, replied.
The clove nodded his head silently, cut off another thin strip of meat, and growled,
"That damn dragon!"
The large man boomed with laughter.
"It won't get past us again. You're new, but you'll see. Trust me, we'll be feasting on dragon flesh tomorrow."
He pulled out a large dagger from his belt, with several serrated teeth on the hilt.
"Last hunting expedition, we took down a few hatchlings and a female, and I got me a souvenir,"
he announced, showing it off in the firelight. The clothes saw the grisly trophy. A surge of anger arose within him. Showing neither anger or approval, Leclove nodded. "That is something," he remarked. Even though he had fought in Thrallin, he couldn't imagine killing a mother with their fledglings for sport. "Yeah, we broke the fledglings' wings so their shrieks would lure the mother in to our ambush. She never stood a chance," the fat man boasted. "This one we're chasing now is a little smarter than the rest, but we'll get him, you just watch. Chiefs never let us go back empty-handed before," he added, patting him on the shoulder. Clove's nostrils felt hot as he let out a slow, steady breath. "What if the yellow-eyed creature came back out of the canyon?" he asked. The large man only snorted and shook his head. "Dragons are clever creatures," he scoffed. "It wouldn't be that stupid." Leclove's eyes flickered like molten metal as he turned to look at the fat man right in the eye. "I'm not a dragon," he whispered. The fat man gasped in terror, but before he could say another word, Leclove gripped him by his leather armor and threw him into the cooking fire. Flint and the rest of the warriors turned about in horror when they heard the commotion. In seconds, the fat man was engulfed in fire, shrieking and flailing about it as he knocked over the spit. "Oh gods, it's mush!" one exclaimed. "Somebody do something!" shrieked another in panic, while the others threw dirt and blankets on the poor screaming man as he flopped about on the ground. Flint grabbed Leclove by the shoulder. "How did this happen?" he demanded. That's all he managed to ask before the yellow-eyed warrior turned and buried his axe between Flint's eyes. Leclove was a blur as he sent blood flying in every direction, disguised as one of their own. In the rush of madness and chaos, he was practically invisible. Before the dragon hunters even realized they were under attack, Leclove had already killed 4 of them. Fear and panic gripped their hearts. Their hands went for their weapons, but they often mistook one another for their attacker. And the blind flurry of carnage, sparks spread from the campfire and leapt from tent to canvas tent. In a matter of minutes, the entire encampment was engulfed in flames, and everyone was either massacred or had fled into the darkness. Blood dripped from his battle axe as Leclove whirled around, expecting someone else to leap out from the smoldering carnage. But just as he thought it was all over, he saw the young warrior standing at the edge of the campsite. He stood there in a daze, as if lost in a horrible nightmare, and then stopped and looked up in horror when he saw Leclove. The savage thrill of battle left him, and Leclove groaned as he wished he had killed him in the shadows rather than facing him now. Never before could he recall killing a foe so young. In fact, he was only a year or 2 younger than himself. Leclove swallowed hard, realizing that in another lifetime they might have even been friends, but he knew by the haunted look on his face as he walked about the butchered bodies of his brethren that friendship was not going to be formed through a simple apology. Leclove waited for the younger warrior to take up a weapon from the fallen, but instead he just stood there and stared at him with tears streaming down his face. "Why didn't you kill me too?" he shouted. Leclove clenched his teeth. He could feel the vexed brokenness in his soul and knew he had loved his brethren just as much as he did his own family, but he remained silent, waiting for the warrior to attack him.
What are you waiting for? He snarled, pounding his chest to egg him on. But the clove stood firm and held his ground. You stinking dragon! I hope you're alive when they rip your wings off! Instead of rushing at him like Leclove had hoped for, the boy turned and began walking away. Thankfully, the gruesome vow of vengeance strengthened Leclove's resolve, and he did what needed to be done. He hurled the battle axe. A distinct cracking sound of the metal axe head bearing into the back of his skull rang out long after the boy fell face down into the ground, into a pool of blood. It had not been an honorable thing to kill an unarmed warrior while his back was turned, but Leclove had no doubt the young warrior would have attempted to cut his throat while he slept. At least, that's what he would have done. At least, that's what he would have done in his place. Leclove knew he could not linger long, for it would only be a matter of time before the dragon hunters found Lohita. Rifling through the smoldering remains of the camp, he hurriedly stuffed food and supplies into a small burlap sack, and he also took a hunting bow and a quiver of arrows, which he knew would come in handy, and took off toward the canyon. Not to worry, this is just a brief intermission as we switch over to see what Lohita is up to, and I put on my best girl voice. Lohita glanced about nervously as she warmed her hands next to the large campfire. She had managed to heal her wounded leg, but using magic in her current form was very taxing. As tired as she was, she could not sleep. She had never been human for this long, and it made her feel like a hatchling right out of an egg. Now she was jumping at every sound like a frightened rabbit as the wolves continued to howl. Time slipped on by, but the mysterious stranger did not return, and she began to fear he had been captured, or worse, he was actually working for another shaman who desired to use her blood and bone for their own dark magic. Lohita swallowed hard when she heard a high-pitched bird call. She slowly looked out into the darkness, knowing full well that such birds wouldn't be out until daylight. She thought and hoped it might be Leclove, until she heard the response from the opposite direction. Lohita reached down and picked up a stick from the fire and backed up against the stone wall in dread. Then she saw the glint of steel spears and axes flickering in the firelight. The leader stepped into view. "Where is your dragon, wench?" he demanded. Lohita's heart stopped as she stared mutely at the tall warrior. The chieftain snarled as he slammed his double-bladed axe into the tree next to him and grinned wickedly as he pulled out a large, menacing dagger from his belt. "Tell us where he is, or I will get him to come running to the sound of your screams while I peel the flesh off your pretty face." Lohita quavered in fear as she glanced about. She was completely surrounded. Could she have been mistaken? Could they know something that she didn't? Could he have been a dragon? Why on earth would he allow her to think he was a human? Tears began to well up, and she covered her face with her free hand and shook her head. "He left! I don't know where he is. He's just a human. He's not a dragon. Please, I haven't seen him. I don't think he's coming back. Please." Firebrand, the tall dragon hunter chieftain, flashed the dagger in the firelight. "Oh, I think he will come. I saw it in his eyes. No human has eyes like that. No human would be so rash and wild. Obviously, he used magic to heal your leg. He'll come. I assure you, he'll come. Lolita shook her head. He's not a dragon. He can't be, she protested, trying to convince the hunters as well as herself. How could she have been so arrogant and blind? He must have thought she was such a fledgling. Are you going to scream? Or do I have to make you scream? Firebrand asked while the hunters laughed crudely. Suddenly, one of the warriors behind him shouted out in panic, "There's smoke in the distance!" The hunters turned and looked and saw in the rising sun a great plume of smoke rising over their heads. Firebrand's face turned ghost white. His men began to shout in panic as white flakes of ash began descending upon them. "Fire breather! It's a fire breather!" They began to shriek as they took cover beneath the rocks and trees. "Chief! That's coming from our encampment!" Upon hearing this, Firebrand's face turned hot red, and he began to tremble in rage. "Fools! Don't hide behind those trees unless you want to burn with them! Get to your positions, you cowardly pieces of filth!" he snarled. Without warning, he whirled around and struck Lolita across the face with his open hand. "That is for my men, you stinking whore," he growled, and then began beating her senseless until she sagged against her restraints, and her dark raven hair clung to the blood running down her bruised face. "Look up at me, whore!" Firebrand snarled. Suddenly there was a loud crack. Everything came to a sudden halt when he saw an arrow sticking out from a tree Lolita was tied to. Firebrand frowned, recognizing it was one of their own arrows. He turned and faced his men. "Who shot that?" he demanded. The hunters looked toward their archers, who were likewise looking at one another in confusion, when suddenly another arrow whizzed right past the chieftain's head. Firebrand quickly crouched to the ground and warily scanned the shadows for the unseen archer. The clove cursed under his breath as he hid behind a large oak tree. He had fired too quickly, letting his emotions get the best of him. His nostrils flared as he calmly notched another arrow, ignoring the chieftain's loud challenges and threats that boomed off the narrow canyon walls. "What's your problem?" Firebrand demanded, chuckling cruelly as another arrow flew harmlessly past him. "Ha ha! You're not too good of a shot, are you?" he laughed, and then his attention fell back on Lolita. "Careful! You might shoot the girl before I'm finished with her!" Ha ha! Battered and bruised, Lolita shrieked as the man ripped open her blouse. "Come out and be a man, or stay and watch us take our turn with your whore," Firebrand guffawed. Suddenly, the hunters began shouting in panic, pointing toward the roaring wildfire leaping from treetop to treetop above the canyon wall. They completely forgot about the unseen archer, and all eyes searched the rising smoke and smoldering ashes. "The fire breather! The fire breather is coming!" They all shouted hysterically. Lolita choked and gasped as she struggled to look up. A small bit of hope welled up inside her when she saw the wall of flames raging along the canyon walls. "He is a dragon!" she gasped in wonder and awe. Before Firebrand could issue a command, the sound of blood-curdling screams began to echo throughout the valley. "He's here! He's here!" The hunters shrieked over the screams of the dying. Firebrand turned just in time to be sprayed in the face with the blood of one of his own captains. The chieftain cursed and snarled as 3 of his best men were overwhelmed by the snarling, yellow-eyed savage. One
fell backward with his throat slashed open. Another had his bowels spilling out from the wound in his stomach, and the third stumbled backward, his hand over his blinded eye. Firebrand quickly intervened and struck the clove in the back of his skull with the long handle of his battle-axe, sending him sprawling to the ground. "Show us your true form, dragon!" Firebrand jeered as the clove groped about in a daze. The rest of the hunters gathered about, crowing ecstatically as they aimed their arrows at him. Lohita shrieked in panic. "Don't do it, Clove! It's a trap! They'll kill you when you do!" she cried. Firebrand snarled and wrapped his hand around Lohita's throat, choking her so that she couldn't speak. "Shut up, whore!" he snapped. Suddenly, just as all seemed lost, an ancient voice shook the canyon walls. "The woman belongs to me." Firebrand released Lohita and turned to see a tall, red-bearded man dressed in a black robe. He stood on top of a chariot with 100 soldiers standing behind him, awaiting his command. The chieftain grinned evilly as he cut Lohita's hands loose. "Take your whore, but the dragon is ours," he declared. But the moment Firebrand finished speaking, Lohita snatched up a heavy sword from one of the fallen warriors and whirled around, striking the chieftain below the knee. Firebrand shrieked and stared up at the woman as he fell. The blade turned into a blinding white light. "The Clove, run!" she screamed as she wielded the shining sword. The dragon hunters automatically went to Firebrand's aid, while the soldiers came charging headlong into the fray to capture the dragoness. Meanwhile, the Clove staggered back to his feet and saw her dark silhouette weeping as she fought the dragon hunters with every ounce of magic and strength she had. "Change while they're distracted," she pleaded. "What's wrong with what I'm wearing now?" the Clove yelled sarcastically. And then a dragon hunter thrust a spear into Lohita's abdomen. The Clove watched in horror as the blazing white light from her sword went out as she fell to the ground. In an instant, the Clove rushed and cut down the spearman and cradled her bruised, bloodied body. "The Clove, it's too late for me. Go, leave, fly away," she begged. Unable to do anything, the Clove refused to run. "I don't fly," he snarled over the sounds of clashing metal, as now he fought back both dragon hunter and soldiers to keep them away from Lohita. He would not let man or beast touch her, not in life and not in death. The pain began to lessen, and Lohita felt her body going cold as she shivered on the ground. She stared curiously up at the billowing smoke overhead. How was it that he was old enough to breathe fire, yet could not fly? Had his wings been crippled? Why hadn't he sought out to heal her? Or had he been banished, like in Thrallin? Soon the noises of the horrid battle grew distant, and their vision clouded. The battle between the two forces was fierce, but it did not last long. With their leader slain, the dragon hunters quickly fled, leaving the Clove surrounded by the soldiers in black armor. However, they kept their distance and did not attack as the bearded man stepped down from his chariot and moved toward them. The Clove held up his bloody cutlass and thrust it outward in a threatening gesture. "I should have died so many times before," he snarled. "I was ready to die then, and I'm ready to die now, old man." The bearded man frowned. "My name is Alderneth, and I am a necromancer. I profit nothing from your death, or hers." The Clove still refused to set down his sword.
"Then you best walk away," he snapped.
"Can you save her?" the sorcerer asked, gesturing to the bloodied maiden at his feet. The Clove faltered for a moment as his gaze fell upon Loida, who lay unconscious. Her eyes were closed as if asleep. She did not move. She did not even appear to be breathing. The Clove's yellow eyes blazed with anger, and he held his ground.
"Sometimes it is better to die," he declared grimly.
The sorcerer pressed his fingertips together and studied the yellow-eyed warrior thoughtfully, and then burst out in laughter.
"You are no dragon," he declared. "What's it to you?" Leclos demanded.
The sorcerer grinned evilly.
"A great deal, young warrior. It means without my help, she will die. Only I can heal her, and I assure you, I will make her whole once again. That is what you desire, is it not?"
The Clove eyed the sorcerer untrustingly, but slowly he stepped away, allowing him next to Loida. A faint glow came from his hand as he gently touched her bruised and bloodied face with his palm. The smell of magic quickly overpowered the stench of death and smoke. The Clove gasped in dismay as he watched the cuts and abrasions melt away from Lohida's face. With one swift motion, Alderneth removed the broken spear tip from her side. The wound closed quickly without leaving a single mark or scar. The Clove let out a tense gust of air as he watched Lohida sleep quietly in the midst of the carnage. Alderneth then pulled out the smooth black onyx stone from her pocket. He slowly rose to his feet and looked down at the Clove. "Carry her. You will come with me now," he declared in a matter-of-fact tone, and then turned to walk back towards his chariot. The Clove studied the sorcerer for a moment. "You seem certain of that," he commented, not trusting the bearded man. "I saved her life. She belongs to me," Alderneth declared. The Clove's eyes narrowed into angry slits and stepped between Lohida and the sorcerer. "I think she will decide where she goes," he said sharply. Alderneth paused and studied the yellow-eyed pyro. "Do you think you can stop me?" he inquired. "Do you really think you have a choice at all?" The Clove clenched his teeth and glanced at the rows of soldiers. "I think that without your men, you are like a snake without its fangs. Send your dogs. I choose my own fate," he vowed stoically. Alderneth's nostrils flared with indignation, but his eyes remained calm. "Very well, mighty warrior," he said with sarcasm in his voice. "I have my weapon." He held the black stone in his hands, and suddenly there was a loud explosion followed by a cloud of smoke rising from the stone, which had turned into a long iron staff. Alderneth held the staff up to the sky. "Defeat me, and my men will serve you. But if I win, the dragoness is mine," he declared. Clearly taken off guard by the challenge, the Clove paused for a moment and stared at the sorcerer in surprise, and looked around for some sort of trap. When he saw none, he became troubled. The Clove realized that this was the staff he had been sent to save. Lohida had it all along, which meant the mission the damned unicorn had sent him on had been
a dismal failure. At the moment, that didn't seem to matter. He knew it was selfish, but he didn't care about the staff. All he cared about was Lohita. Alderneth laughed. Alderneth laughed and mocked him. Surrender and spare yourself the disgrace, for I will not let you taste of death. Leclos' face flashed red with anger, but he remained poised, searching for weakness while Alderneth continued to mock him. Hesitation? Do I see fear in your eyes? He inquired, but then Leclos let out a loud roar and charged at him. A flash of lightning came shooting from Alderneth's fingertips, striking Leclos' blade with such power that the metal grew red and sparks flew off in all directions. The concussive force threw Leclos back like a rag doll, and he sprawled onto the unforgiving rocky earth, where he struggled to gather his senses through the ringing white noise in his ears. He didn't realize how badly he had been hurt or what had hit him. He shakily gasped and wheezed for air. His blurred eyes began searching for his father's sword, but somehow he had managed to keep hold of his cutlass, but not without consequence. His fingertips felt ice cold, and the moment he tried to move his arm, his left shoulder spasmed and would not move. Leclos cursed in anger, and hot tears rushed down his face as he pried the hilt from his numb fingers. Taking the cutlass into his other hand, Alderneth laughed at his futile attempts to get back to his feet. "Perhaps you should reevaluate your situation," he chuckled, gesturing toward the warrior's cutlass. Leclos' gaze fell upon the red-hot tip. The shattered blade was smoldering in his hand. His face grew pale, his heart plummeted, and he collapsed to his knees, staring at his father's cutlass. "If you wish, you can take a sword from one of the dead," Alderneth offered. "But that's right. Your kind do not keep the swords of the fallen, do they?" he interjected, quoting part of the source code, while Leclos stared at the broken cutlass in despair and turned his eyes on the soldiers converging about him. "If you choose to fight, I will pick you apart, piece by piece, until you fall broken before me. You will only die when I allow it." Leclos' eyes drifted toward Lohita, who was sleeping on the ground. He let out a tense breath and lowered his head in defeat, using his good hand as he reached up, pulling the leather sheath from across his shoulder, holding the broken sword, hilt first, facing the soldier in front of him in the traditional sign of surrender. But the moment the captain stepped forward to take the sword, Leclos lunged forward, slamming the pommel of the blade into his face, knocking him over. Leclos let out a snarl as he shattered the wrist of another soldier attempting to take him from behind, but he was surrounded and did not see the pike staff coming to crack him over the back of the head, knocking him out cold. Up next, Chapter 16, Part 18 of The Dragon Scourge. This is M.R.R. Lopez, both author and narrator. If you'd like to support me, the book is on Amazon, both in digital and paperback format. Also, if you want to send in a request, you can contact me at thedragonscourge@gmail.com.
If you have a manuscript that you would like me to read or any suggestions, let me know. It's been fun for me, and if you've gotten this far, I hope you're having a good time as well. It's been quite the adventure. Up next will be Chapter 17, Truth Be Told.